Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
It is about me and an old buddy I'll call Jim. I'd classify it as truth is stranger than fiction, and you can draw your own conclusions. My story begins in the summer of 1975 when I struck up a friendship with a co-worker at a summer job. We were both going to be seniors in high school in the fall, and we both had a lot in common. We became pretty close friends and did everything together that summer. We did some double dating, and he met his future wife that summer. He was engaged before he was out of high school and was married shortly after graduation. Children came quickly, and we lost touch as our lives took different paths. It had been about 7 years since I'd had any contact with Jim, but on an icy cold January night I awoke in a hotel room from a disturbing dream in a sweat. In the dream I saw my friend Jim. His face was backlit by what appeared to be white light, much like a full moon forming a halo of light around his face. His eyes were opened wide and the wind was rippling through his hair. The dream image seemed even stranger because we weren't face to face in the conventional sense. It was like we were both adrift or weightless. The image had the feel of both of us staring at each other with one of us being inverted. I was excited to see him and yelled, "Jim, how you been?" His expression never changed and he seemed pale. He just kept calling me by name and repeating,
"I'm cold, I'm so cold."
I awoke and couldn't shake the image. I finally drifted back off to sleep at about 3 a.m., but the dream came back. I went into work the next morning and was unable to shake the dream. I told the story to my coworkers, who found the story to be pretty eerie. It was Friday and I traveled home from work that afternoon. That evening I was stunned by the evening news that reported my friend had slid off an ice-packed country road at a bridge on the way home and that he had tragically died in the accident. I couldn't believe my ears. It gave me chills, and the dream was forever etched in my mind. Over the years I thought about that dream. It seemed pretty creepy, but time has the ability to put some of those things in perspective. I let it go as a crazy coincidence. About 8 years passed and I was called out on my job to investigate a car accident on a Saturday night. A drunken driver had driven onto a railroad track way out in the middle of the country and had gotten hung up there. I was dispatched to ensure there was no damage to the track. While waiting for the car to be removed from the track, I sat with a local sheriff's deputy and chatted about my roots to that area as I grew up. It turned out the deputy had been a friend of my old buddy Jim, and we were only about a mile from where he had lost his life in the accident. In fact, he had been the one who found my friend on a cold January night. I mentioned that I had heard he had slid off the road at a bridge and had died tragically in the accident. He corrected me and said,
"That's not what happened."
He said that Jim had headed home in his truck and slid off the road at a small bridge. The truck overturned in the ditch, upside down, just after dark on a lightly traveled road and became obscured by the brush. He told me he found my buddy around 3 a.m. The accident had not injured him. He was belted into his seat. Unfortunately, the accident broke all of his windows out and crushed the cab just enough that he couldn't get out of his inverted position. He was suspended upside down in the cab with no coat on for about 8 hours on a bitterly cold night. He told me when he found him, he was barely conscious. All he could do was mumble, "I'm cold. I'm so cold." They extracted him alive out of the truck, but he died of hypothermia on the way to the hospital. That's when my blood ran cold. I have chills to this day when I think of that dream.
When cell phones first started to get popular, my mom bought me, my sis, and herself all a new cell phone, on the condition that if she called that we always answer no matter what. No excuses. Every time. One night I was walking up my long country driveway after we had a big snowstorm. I had a 2-wheel drive car and couldn't make it up, so I would park at the bottom. I started walking and my phone went off. It was a text from my mom, but there was no message. Just a blank screen. As I was holding it, the phone went off again and again and again. One after another. About 10 times. All text messages from my mom with no message. Just blank. I was thinking, what the hell is this? Then my phone rang right when I was at the door. It was my mom. I said hello, and the first thing she said was,
"I have been texting you. Why didn't you respond? Where are you? What are you doing?"
I said, "Mom, I am literally walking in the door right now." Which I was. Most nights my mom slept on the couch because my dad is a crazy dreamer. He would kick and punch my mom in his sleep. The couch was perfectly visible from the front door when you walked inside my house. Anyways, all the lights were off in my house as I walked in. I was just telling my mom I was walking in the door. She said she really needed to talk to me when I got inside. To come talk to her. I was kicking off my shoes at that point and I couldn't see anything. I said, okay, and my mom said, I love you. I said, I love you too. The moment I was flipping the light switch to the walk-in light inside my house where everyone took off their shoes, I was literally looking at my mom fast asleep snoring on the couch as I was saying, I love you too. Then I was looking at my mom sleeping as I heard the phone click from the caller on the other end hanging up. It couldn't have been my mom. I was so confused and scared and just in shock. My brain could not compute what happened. As I was standing there shaking and trying to grasp what happened, I could hear my mom moaning in her sleep. She was obviously having a bad dream. A nightmare. I turned on the living room light and I shook my mom awake. She flew up into a sitting position in a panic. Tears in her eyes. She was in full mom panic mode. She said she was having the worst dream, that I had been killed in a car crash. She explained how she was desperately trying to call me and text me in her dream, but she couldn't dial the numbers right. No matter how hard she tried to open up a line of communication with me, she couldn't get her cell phone to work right, which I have had the same kind of nightmare myself. Utter frustration and panic. As she told me about her dream, I must have turned white from pure shock and confusion. She noticed and asked me what was wrong with me. I told her what happened, how she had texted me a bunch of times with blank messages back to back 10 times, and I also told her about the phone call. I told her exactly what happened. We were just dumbfounded is the only way I can put it. Just pure confusion and excitement at the same time. There are no words to describe the way I felt that night. We decided to look at our call history on our phones, but there was none. It was like it never happened, but it did happen. As sure as the sky is blue. I know it happened. My mom knew I was telling the truth too. When the phone bill arrived that month, there was no record of what happened in the statement either. Super strange. Super weird. I will never forget what happened that night. It changed me forever. I don't discount crazy stories people tell because I know crazy shit and impossible shit happens. I know because it happened to me.
I was a career soldier. I left active duty in March 2014, and also graduated with an MBA the same month. My life was ending in one regard and beginning in the same motion. The only contention was the economy. Getting out of the service was a little scary, facing the uncertainty, so I applied for jobs with no luck for the next few months until my unemployment checks ran out. No luck at all. Hundreds of resumes and no calls or interviews that didn't lead to any offers. I was in a bad place mentally. Depression kicked in pretty hard and I felt like suicide was the answer, as I still had my military life insurance and I thought the money was better for my family than me being jobless. Now, here, if you pay attention, are the steps to ego death. I began a process of looking back through my life as I sat there in my basement with my loaded AR-15 in front of me. I was a family man, having raised 3 kids, and was a well-accomplished soldier. The more I looked over my life, the angrier I got. Until, finally I yelled out, God, why have you forsaken me? Tears were rolling down my cheeks and I immediately felt a warmth in my body and I could feel a presence with me. I felt my tears being wiped from my face and the warmth began to spread to my spine. Here it traveled up to my head and my head began to tingle. Instantly I was propelled into a series of visions. I was looking at myself in my past. I was shown my life in key moments and was able to view my thoughts as well as the thoughts of others at the same exact time. In doing so, I was able to see that whenever people come together and there is an interaction, both parties always rationalize their choice of words and their actions are rationalized to the same degree. I looked out the window from my basement and in the distance, I could see a brilliant white orb in the sky that then disappeared into the clouds. For the next 3 days, I was at peace with the universe. I seemed to be connected to something, as any question I would ask myself, I would get an answer pop up in my head that would be very convincing. I sat there and wrote a book for the first 2 days. On day 3, I had a thought about camping, and when I went to wake my wife up, the first thing she said was that she had a dream about our camping. I saw this as a sign and said to her, let's go today. So, that is what we did. Without a plan, I just went to Walmart and bought sleeping bags, a tent, and all the items we thought we would need and headed towards Mount Rainier. Now, we must have stopped at 3 campsites before we got to the entrance to Mount Rainier National Park. They were all booked up and had no vacancies. The park had 2 campsites, so it was our last hope. After stopping at the kiosk at the entrance to the campsite, we had to drive around the park to see if we could find a site that did not have a reservation on it. After an hour of driving, we could not find one open spot. Giving up, we started driving for the exit. All of a sudden, a park ranger steps out on the road in front of us. We slow down and ask him if all the spots are booked up, and he replies yes, they are sold out. I then ask where I need to go to get a refund as I paid at the kiosk. He told me to stop at a shed near the entrance. We stop, I get out and go up and process the refund. The guy behind the counter stops me as I begin to walk away after the refund is complete. He says, "Hey, we have some primitive campsites outside of the park that are free if you are interested." I look at the map he shows me, and my wife agrees that we came to camp, so camping is what we are going to do. Now, as we pull into this primitive campsite off the grid, we are alone. It is right next to a river, and I asked my wife if it looked like her dream, and she replied, "Yes, this is exactly what my dream looked like." I felt as if I was going to receive a message sometime during our trip, but nothing could prepare me for the events that would take place that night. So, around 10 p.m., my wife and I decided to lie down. The kids were already sleeping, so we both got into our sleeping bags and were looking straight up at the sky, as you could see the sky through the top of the tent, which had that mosquito netting allowing for a perfect view of the night sky. As we watched, a brilliantly lit, white sphere went right over the top of us, a few hundred feet above the trees. It made no sound but was quite the sight to see. I looked at my wife and said, "What was that?" To her reply, "I am going to bed." I got out of the tent as fast as I could, and by the time I got out to look for the object, it was gone. I tried staying up for another hour to keep the fire going, but nothing unusual happened. Finally, I returned to the tent and went to sleep. I do not know how long I was asleep, but the next thing I know, my wife is waking me up saying she hears two people talking behind the tent. I stand up and look around, knowing that people would need flashlights to navigate the forest, and did not hear anything or anyone. I asked her, "Are you sure?" To her reply, "Yes," and my son chimed in and confirms that he heard them too. So, now everyone is spooked, and we all went to the car to sleep out the rest of the night. I waited for my family to fall asleep and looked at the clock just before I fell asleep that read 12 o'clock. As soon as I sleep, I am propelled into this extremely vivid dream. It is me, I am on all fours in a sort of praying position, and in front of me, I can see legs and feet. The being in front of me is large, I would say twice my size. The skin is blue and hairless. I attempt to look up to see who is in front of me, and something is restraining me from looking up too far. I ask the being, "Who are you?" The being responds, but the way in which it responds is telepathic. I can see these illuminated golden symbols pass through my mind, and I catch myself mimicking what is being conveyed as I utter the word God. I asked, "Why have you brought me here?" Instantly I was propelled into a vision where I see a woman and two children in a horrific scene. They are huddled in the corner of a kitchen. As the scene spans out, I can see that the building they're in has been bombed. The vision keeps spanning out as I get a clearer picture of what is transpiring, and I see tanks down the road approaching the house with the woman and children. There are soldiers walking next to the tanks wearing gas masks. The scene spans out to the entire globe, and I see the explosions from bombs all over the place. I came out of the vision crying. I said, "I don't understand." Here a shorter vision is shown where I see the same type of illuminated orbs that I saw the night before coming off the planet while it was still calm. I took this vision as some people will be saved before the end. I tell the being, "I do not understand," and being put in another vision. This time I can see that I am in Jerusalem. Only war has already hit here, as the buildings are blown up and the entire city seems deserted. I see me, then I am put in a first-person view where I start walking down a path. This path leads to a wall. Along the wall, there is a giant green door. I walk up to the door and knock on it 3 times. A man dressed in all black with black beard answers. I lift up my left hand and show him an olive tree branch and say, "I come in peace, may I enter?" He steps aside and says, "Yes, we have been awaiting you." He then leads me to the dome of the rock and then takes me in the building down to the basement. Here the bedrock is exposed and he bends down to gesture for me to inspect some of the rock that seemed discolored. I reach down to touch the rock and the entire vision goes white. I am then back in front of the blue being, more confused than ever. I shake my head and say, I do not understand. Who am I? The being then shows me with its hands, a hologram of a headshot of Jesus with a crown of thorns. I shake my head at it and say, I don't understand, to which the hologram morphs into a reflection of me and I am looking at myself. The dream ends with a bright white light and I wake up in the car. The time reads 4 o'clock. I look out my car window and the same orb UFO from the night before is there a few thousand feet above me. It moves to the top of Mount Rainier, hovers, and just as I was about to wake my wife to show her it returned, it shoots straight up in the air like a bullet out of a gun. We packed up the car and left camping shortly afterward. I told my wife about the dream on the way back home. Now, I was an atheist before this encounter and came out with more questions. This drove me to study and learn, and that is exactly what I have been doing for years since. I know who they are now. They are the Shining Ones. I have written threads on the subject matter, but make no mistake, these beings are here, they watch us, and there are things at stake in this life. Your soul is one of them.
I have been having a lot of things happen to me recently that have made me think back on something very odd that happened when I was younger. I am currently a 23-year-old man and live a relatively normal life. Rewind back to when I was 7 years old and a kid in my neighborhood had been abducted. Abducted by a person, that is. A 5-year-old boy was kidnapped through his open window on the second story. I lived in a pretty upscale neighborhood in coastal Florida at the time, so things like that just didn't happen around that area, so it caused a lot of panic in parents around town. That panic obviously shifted to fear, and that fear was felt by us kids, and with the story on the news to back it up. It was enough to give any child nightmares. Fast forward a few months later when the story kind of faded from news outlets, and the panic slowly faded as well. I, however, would have nightmares sometimes about someone coming into my room and taking me. My parents would always check the locks on my windows and reassure me that I would be just fine, but the nightmares continued for some time. I recall one very specific dream that stood out from the rest, however. I was in my bed with my little brother's room next door and my parents' room down the hall. I was the last one awake because I went around the house crawling like a military man on a mission, trying not to get caught by my parents, so that I could sneak into the living room and watch TV past my bedtime. Anyway, I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Not something I did because that obviously would blow my cover in the morning. I remember waking up at the very early stages of morning, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I turned off the TV and walked to my room. I lay down in bed, pull the covers over my head, and I close my eyes. Tap. I pull my covers down instantly. Something had just tapped on my window. I go into full panic mode, but I can't bring myself to move or scream. Tap. Now I am hyperventilating, but something compelled me to pull my curtains back. I walked to the window, pulled the curtains back, and saw nothing. Before I go any further, I would like to make something clear. Growing up, I was very adventurous. This, however, was completely out of my comfort zone. Anyways, for some reason I took my screen off my window and opened my window so that I could crawl out. Next thing I know, I am standing barefoot in my pajama bottoms in my sandy backyard. To this day I can remember how weird I felt. What comes next is a blur. I remember walking down the road and seeing a house that was very distinctive because it had been struck by lightning 3 times in the last year and had nearly burnt to the ground each time. This house was several blocks away from my house but still in the neighborhood. I remember a child's yellow slide coming from the second-story window down to the ground floor on the outside of the house. I proceeded to walk up to the house and make my way up the slide. As I started to get closer to the top of the slide, I could hear what sounded like a family having dinner. I got to the top and peeked inside. It was a family, but they were completely white with no distinctive facial features. I can't recall what I saw them doing, but I remember thinking they were vampires. Wherever I saw them do scared me to the point of me falling down into the house. I landed on my back, the room spun for a moment. The last thing I remember was 3 of them standing over me. 7:30 a.m. The alarm clock rings. Thank God it was just a dream. I pull my covers down and wipe my eyes. Slide my feet to the side of my bed. My feet are filthy. Odd. I take notice and proceed to stand up. I immediately crashed to the floor when a sharp lightning-like pain shot through my leg. I physically could not get up. I screamed for my parents, who initially thought I was making it up to get out of going to school. My dad had noticed my screen was missing from my window and gave me a stern look of disbelief when I told him I didn't know what happened to it. They realized I was in excruciating pain. I couldn't stop crying. They took me to the ER for x-rays. This is when I got really freaked out. The x-ray showed a hole punch in my femur. The doctor said he'd never seen anything like it and had absolutely no idea what could have caused it. Dumbfounded, we left the hospital with pain meds and a follow-up appointment that would end up amounting to me making a full recovery. To this day, I don't know if that was a dream or if I actually experienced something truly extraordinary that night. I was wondering if anyone else has ever experienced anything similar.
I live in eastern Oklahoma. This originally occurred in October 2013. It was around 7:30 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of my mom leaving for work. I went back to sleep. That's when they entered my dream and proceeded to use it to connect with me telepathically. I can't really pinpoint what triggers my encounters, but these alien entities always direct me to do what I need to do to help them. At first, I thought that I was just dreaming, until I was overcome with an intense feeling of this dream no longer being my own. It was my alien guide watching me from above me, taking control of my dream. I was alarmed by this. I remember seeing other people, more like shadows, on an elevator that they had produced for me, it being a means of transporting me from my room to their craft. I knew that they were doing this. I was aware of it. They placed me in the frame of mind that was needed in order for me to do my job by scaring me, and becoming submissive as a result of my fear. Only when I was submissive would I be able to comply with their requests. They scared me by means of hearing the engine of the craft gearing up to leave. The noise seemed to come alive by means of a tingling light that entered not only the elevator, but also passed through me front to back. The tighter I shut my eyes, the more details of my surroundings I could see because the light that this noise produced got so bright that had my eyes been opened, I would have been blinded by the brightness. With my eyes closed, it was easier to see details of my surroundings. I was magnetically drawn into the craft where I then proceeded to tend to my first order of business, which was to try on different visualizations of different types of hands, faces, arms, legs, and feet for the purpose of deciding what would look most human, but more importantly, what would be most practical for their purpose. I would enter into a hospital-like area. I somehow knew that this craft had multiple levels. During this visit, I was only needed on this one level. My guide told me to go get something from one of the receptionists. I walked past the receptionists, surveyed the patients, saw some scary-looking tubes and bags containing what looked like blood. These bags were apparently organic in nature because they seemed to be alive and providing nutrients to possible hybrid beings. These scenarios have occurred at least a dozen times since then and continue to this day.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.